In this video, I'm going to give you a quick demo of the shape tool and adding colors, strokes, and gradients to shapes. So in the toolbar in the left side of your screen, right here, there is a tool called the rectangle tool. When you hover over it, it shows you the name. When you click and hold down, it shows you the other tools that are underneath it. The flare tool you won't use. It's not something I've ever used. It's a very specialized tool. So let's just go to the rectangle tool. Click on it. It's dark over here, so it's highlighted. When I click and drag, it's going to make a shape. Now, mine's not set to default, but by default, it'll show up as a white fill and a black stroke. The fill is the inside. The stroke is the outline on the outside. You can see those represented down here. And if I hover over it, it tells me what they are. To change the color of the fill, there's a few ways you can do that. As long as it's in the front in the toolbar, you can go over to the swatches palette and click on a color and it will change it. Or you can double click on the color over in the toolbar and it'll bring up the color picker, and you can pick a custom color in here by dragging this up and down and by moving this guy around. When you're happy with your color, you say OK. If you want to change the color on the stroke, bring the stroke to the front and choose your color. Let's go with this. Right now, it's only at a 1 point, which we can see up here in the option bar. So that's why it's hard to see. If I raise the stroke, it'll make it thicker. So I can actually see my stroke there. Okay. Now, if I were to make a second shape, so I'm going to my shape tool, clicking and holding down, because I want to change the shape. I want to change it to a star. If I click and drag my star out, it will automatically use the previous settings to make your shape. Another quick thing that I want to mention with making stars or polygons, you can change how many points there are by clicking and dragging. And while you're still dragging, if you hit the up and down arrow key on your keyboard, it's going to add and down or subtract points. Same thing with the polygon tool. If I click and drag and do less, I can make a pentagon and so on. So I'm going to just select this and hit delete on the keyboard, hit delete on the keyboard to get rid of those. If I want to change either of these, notice I'm using my selection tool, clicking on my shape, and I can go in and change my colors however I want, like so. Now you may notice over in the swatches palette there are a few different options. There's solid colors, but down towards the end here there are some gradients. If I click on that, a gradient is a color that fades into another color. Can have 2, it can have 10, whatever. It gives you just some basic ones. It also gives you some basic patterns. I don't know why they chose these ones. I think they're pretty ugly, and there's much more interesting ones and more useful ones, but it gives you those. If you want more options for those, there is this little button at the bottom left of the swatches palette called the swatches library. When you open that up, it gives you all of these lists of color families. So for instance, if I were to click on foods and ice cream, it brings up what it says are ice cream type colors. So like, think Neapolitan here, the chocolate, vanilla, and the strawberry. So it gives you those kind of pastel-y colors that represent ice cream. But if I go back to the swatches library and click, there are 2 menus that will be useful for you. There's patterns, and it gives you 3 different categories of patterns, and then within there, it gives you different things to choose from. I really like basic graphics. Let's go to texture. And these are things that can be really useful when you're trying to make texture on your designs. But they're just kind of basic black and white texture drawings. And notice it adds it to your swatches palette. All right, so for the stroke on your shape, the outline, you can change that too. So you can change the thickness of it, but you can also change the texture of it by going over here to the brushes palette. It's paired with the swatches palette. So when I click on that, it shows me different types of strokes. And if I were to click on this charcoal feather one, you're going to notice that it changes the stroke on my shape. It sets the stroke back to 1 point. So if I raise that, it'll make it thicker. I can click on these other ones, kind of ugly. I don't know why these are the default ones, but just like in the swatches, there is the brush library menu. You can click on that. Gives you lots of different options. The artistic ones I think are the most useful because they're very textural and make it look more hand done with chalk and charcoal, paintbrush, watercolor. Let's just click on that. So it'll give you some like subtle things in here like brush strokes. They're kind of see-through. So it gives you lots of different textures to put in there so you can really customize the things that you do in Illustrator, and you can still go in and change the thickness of that however you want. You can put in custom measurements there too. Now moving on to more about gradients. I'm just going to delete this shape by clicking on it and hitting delete and getting it off my screen. I'm going to click on this shape with my selection tool and I am going to drag it out just to make it a little bigger. I can also rotate it if I want by getting there they are, the curved arrows. I can rotate. I'm going to do Control Z to undo that. All right, so I want to put a gradient in here. So I'm going to go back to my swatches palette. I'm going to just set it to a basic gradient. And I'm going to open my gradient palette. So now I'm just going to collapse this here. There we go. I have my gradient palette and I have my swatches palette. If you notice, while I have the shape selected with my selection tool, it shows me a miniature version of what my gradient is. It goes from white to black. The fade is directly in the middle. If I wanted to change the colors, say I didn't want white there, what I would need to do is go up to my swatches palette, click on a color, drag it down to my gradient palette, and drop it right on top of that color. It changes it both in my gradient palette and on my shape. If I wanted to add a color, same thing. Let's get yellow. If I click on that and drag, I can just drop that anywhere. You see there's a little plus sign. I can drop it here and it adds yellow to my gradient. If I want to get rid of a color, so let's add a few more here. Let's put blue here. If I want to get rid of this black, all I need to do is click on it, drag it down, and let go of my mouse. And now I can move these colors wherever I want. Now these little diamonds at the top of your gradient palette are where the blend happens. So if I move it closer to one of the colors, the blend is going to be a lot more abrupt over here. The same thing, let's say we move them both close to the yellow. So it's still blending, but it's very, very abrupt. The yellow is not spanning a very large area. So I'm just going to move those back. There are, depending on the version of Illustrator you're using, the old versions have a type with a drop-down menu, and there's either linear or radial. In here, there's another version, but we're just going to talk about linear and radial. So this is a linear gradient where it goes straight up and down. Radial gradient comes from the center. So the left side over here is going to be your center. The right side is going to be your outside edges. I'm going to switch back to linear for right now. So we can change the direction that the gradient goes. If you go over to your toolbar and get the gradient tool and click on it, it's going to bring up a bar that represents your gradient. Now you are not locked into this bar. You don't have to actually touch this bar at all if you don't want. If I want to change the direction of my gradient, instead of going left to right, and I want it to go top to bottom, all I need to do, again, ignoring that bar, is click where I want the gradient to start happening and drag and let go where I want the gradient to stop. And that changes my direction. Now, it doesn't have to be just side to side or up to down. I can go diagonal. I can do it small because it's only going to happen in between where I drag. So I can make it tiny, right? My gradient's just happening in this area. I can make it bigger than my shape, so my gradient spans way outside of my shape. And you have total control over that. If I switch to a radial gradient, the line where you click and let go, the click is going to be the center. So if I were to click over here and drag, the center of my gradient's over here. I were to click here and do it like that, it's small. So same concept. Clicking is where it starts, dragging to is where it ends.